Did you know that humans were wired to respond to faces? This phenomenon is called pareidolia, and it's why we sometimes see faces in everything around us. The human brain is so attuned to faces that we can often see them in inanimate objects like toast, clouds, or rocks, sometimes even in the cafe we drink in the morning. This is On the Couch with Dr. Ty. Welcome back to On the Couch with Dr. Ty. I'm Ty, and today we're going to be diving into a topic that affects millions of people, yet is often misunderstood. When your mind pulls the fire alarm, aka panic attacks. If you ever felt like your heart suddenly is racing, your chest starts to get real tight and you can't breathe, maybe your hands begin to tremble, and you get a tightness in the back of your neck or across your shoulders, and you get a terrifying sense that something really bad is about to happen, then you may have some understanding slightly of what an individual struggling with panic attacks feels like. For many people, a panic attack is one of the most frightening experiences of their lives. In fact, many people experiencing their first panic attack are convinced they're having a heart attack. They're either suffering from a stroke. Sometimes you might even hear them say, "I think I'm dying." The surprising reality is that panic attacks are far more common than most people actually realize. Today, I'm going to try to discuss what panic attacks are, what causes them, why they feel so terrifying, and how they differ from anxiety or generalized anxiety, as we spoke about an episode or two ago, and what science actually tells us about recovering from panic attacks. Here's a story that you might hear that happens all the time. Imagine you're just hanging out with a homie in a restaurant. Nothing crazy's happening. You're eating dinner, maybe just chopping it up with some friends and enjoying yourself. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, your heart starts to pound. You can feel it in your chest. Your breathing becomes a little shallow. You might even start feeling a little dizzy. Your chest begins to get even tighter and tighter and tighter. Your hands start to experience diaphoresis, or they become very sweaty. You feel detached from reality. A terrifying thought starts to jump into your brain. I think I'm dying. Within minutes, you find yourself or a friend reaching over the cell phone, calling 911, or rushing to an emergency room. This exact scenario happens each and every day. And many times, after extensive medical testing, doctors find out that the individuals usually just experienced a panic attack rather than an actual life-threatening medical event. That doesn't mean that experience wasn't real. It absolutely was. The symptoms were very real. The fear was very real. The physiological things that happened to you were real. The suffering was real. A panic attack is a sudden surge of intense fear or discomfort that reaches its peak within minutes. Notice something very important. The fear often appears before an obvious danger. Sometimes we call that an aura. In other words, the body's alarm system activates even though there may be no actual emergency occurring. During a panic attack, individuals commonly experience tachycardia, bradycardia, rapid heartbeat, chest pain, sweating, trembling, shortness of breath, dizziness, chills, tingling sensations. The list goes on and on and on and on. The key word here is these things come on suddenly. Panic attacks often seem to appear out of nowhere. This unpredictability is the main reason they become so frightening. Remember, you're just chopping it up with some friends at a local hangout, and then bam, physiological symptoms kick in. I think I'm going to die. So, how do we distinguish panic versus anxiety? Many people use the word anxiety and panic interchangeably. Psychologically speaking, they are related, but they're really quite different. Anxiety has what we call a gradual approach. You may worry about an exam next week or a bill that's due or a significant other that hasn't called you. Anxiety tends to build up over time, whereas panic, on the other hand, is just like reaching up and flipping a switch on for light when you walk into your room. It's abrupt, it's tense, oftentimes overwhelming. Anxiety is often described as, how do I say, a storm. If you're living in Oklahoma, this great state that I'm in, starting to approach. The clouds are dark. It's pretty out there, but you know something is about to happen. Panic is that lightning that's starting to strike. So, how does this panic play into the fight or flight response? Well, to understand panic attacks, we must understand a little bit about the fight or flight response. Thousands of years ago, this system helped our ancestors survive. If you didn't have fight or flight, you were food. Imagine encountering a huge animal that wanted to eat you. Your brain releases something called adrenaline. Your heart starts to pump fast. Your blood moves into your muscles. Your breathing has to increase. Your nares start to flare. Your senses become sharper. Your eyes become sharper. Your body prepares for an action. The problem is that the brain sometimes activates this response when there is no predator. The panic attack is essentially a false call. The body responds exactly as if there was some danger, but there was nothing. There was no animal trying to eat you. There was no bear or tiger in the room. There was no immediate threat. But the alarm system has simply become what we call oversensitive. So, why do panic attacks sometimes feel like heart attacks? That's a great question. This is one of the most common questions that people ask. Again, as a nurse, I can tell you that countless individuals would arrive on our unit believing they were experiencing cardiac events. Here's why. The symptoms sometimes overlap each other. Both can involve chest discomfort, rapid heartbeat, sweating, shortness of breath, dizziness. What are all those indicative of? A lot of times, heart problems. The difference is that the panic attacks result from an activation of the body's stress response rather than the damage of the heart itself. This is why medical evaluation is very important when we're going through these symptoms. That's why it's very important that these things are very concerning. Sometimes we can't distinguish between the two, but if you have a really, really good clinician, a really, really good person working in the hospital, they'll eliminate these things. A really good medical evaluation is very important. Never assume chest pain is just anxiety. Always seek appropriate medical attention when it's necessary. So, what is the fear of fear? Here's something that's quite fascinating about that term. Many people eventually become more afraid of having another panic attack than the panic attack itself. Yeah. Psychologists call this an anticipatory anxiety. You're starting a loop of anxiety about things you can't control before they even come to fruition. The individual begins wondering, what if? What if? What if? What if it happens? What if I'm driving? What if the plane crashes? What if I'm at work? What if I stand up there and my knees lock and oxygen doesn't get to my brain and I pass out in front of everyone? Soon people may begin avoiding situations that they must eventually come in contact with, and they start to avoid these places because the what ifs. Places like restaurants, shopping centers, airplanes, sporting events, concert venues. Eventually, their world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller because these places become dangerous, if you will, because the fear of panic has become the problem. Having a panic attack does not automatically mean someone has panic disorder. You may have heard those interchanged. You may have been in one of my classrooms and heard how we've had to distinguish between the two. Having a panic attack does not automatically say you are diagnosed with a panic disorder. No. Many people experience one or two panic attacks during their lifetime and never have another. Panic disorder occurs when recurrent panic attacks are followed by persistent worry about future attacks or significant behavioral changes. In other words, the panic attack starts changing how a person conducts their activities of daily living, how they change getting from point A to point B, how they change doing this and doing that and starting excuses not to attend this and that. You see where I'm going with that? So, what happens to our brain during a panic attack? Well, research points to several brain regions that are actually involved in a panic attack. One of the most important is the amygdala. Think of the amygdala as your brain's smoke detector. Its job detects threats. Most of the time, it works perfecto. Sometimes, however, it becomes overworking. Sometimes it's like that smoke detector that needs a battery change and it just beeps and beeps and beeps and beeps. It becomes oversensitive. The detector starts going off when someone either pops a bag of popcorn, makes a little smoke, uses something in the house that made a little bit too much smoke, burns some toast. In these instances, the brain essentially says, danger, 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 even when there's no danger. The body still has to respond accordingly. Let's take a hot second and look at some surprising facts about panic attacks. A panic attack typically peaks within 10 minutes. Although it feels endless, most attacks reach maximum intensity relatively quickly. Try that one on for size. You cannot die from a panic attack. It may feel terrifying, but the attack itself is not what's fatal. Many people who experience panic attacks believe that they're going crazy. Isn't that a fun word? But they're not. They're experiencing a temporary surge of fear and physiological arousal. Body's just normal reaction. Elite athletes, physicians, military personnel, actors, mental health professionals have all publicly discussed experiencing panic attacks. I know I have. One of my favorites is when I share that panic does not discriminate, anxiety does not discriminate, mental health does not discriminate. Many individuals who experience panic attacks are highly intelligent and highly sensitive to bodily sensations. The brains are often excellent at detecting change, and sometimes they're so excellent at detecting change, we call that being a little too excellent, if you can believe that. So sometimes I watch one of my favorite shows and you can't breathe. Sometimes we put bags over people's faces and so on and so forth. Well, sometimes people say that there's a contributing sensation that goes along with panic attacks, and we call that hyperventilation. That's a contributing factor to a panic symptoms. And that's when people become frightened and they start to breathe rapidly. This changes the carbon dioxide levels in the bloodstream, and without getting into all the chemistry and all that stuff, it just basically says that when you change carbon dioxide levels in your bloodstream, you might start experiencing some tingling, dizziness, a little lightheadedness, maybe some blurred vision. Sometimes people hear a little ringing in the ears. Ironically, these sensations can increase fear. Here's that loop that takes off. Then the fear increases breathing. Then the breathing increases the symptoms. And then you have that vicious loop, or that cycle begins. Sometimes hyperventilation is a contributing factor due to a common trigger. And although panic attacks sometimes appear unexpectedly, common triggers sometimes include stressful life situations, poor sleep hygiene, not enough, major life changes. Believe it or not, caffeine can play a role, and that's even energy drinks. Certain medications, substance use, medical illnesses, trauma, the list can go on and on and on. One fact that surprises many people is the role of caffeine. For some individuals, large amounts of caffeine can mimic anxiety symptoms and trigger, guess what? Panic episodes. That extra large energy drink that we had before we went to work out may be doing more than keeping you awake, my friends. The good news is panic attacks are highly treatable, highly manageable. One of the most effective approaches is cognitive behavioral therapy. You've probably heard that in the past, haven't you? Well, CBT helps individuals recognize the relationship between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. For example, my heart is racing. The thought, I'm having a heart attack. Fear increases, symptoms worsen. And here you go with the vicious cycle. CBT teaches individuals to challenge that catastrophic interpretation and develop a healthier response. Sometimes we use exposure-based treatments. These approaches usually are gradually taught to people that feared certain sensations, are uncomfortable, but not dangerous. Oftentimes, we like to encourage grounding techniques. It's one of my favorites. When panic attacks strike, grounding techniques can be helpful by just saying, let's count backwards. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. This helps redirect attention from catastrophic thoughts and back toward the present moment. If you've got a friend or a family member that experiences panic attacks, remember this: telling them just to relax usually never helps. From their perspective, something terrifying is actually happening. Instead, offer them some calm reassurance. Remain with them. Encourage them to just try to control their breathing. Breathe with them if you can. Listen to them. Just be supportive. And compassion is often far more effective than advice. If there's anything I'd like you to remember about panic attacks, this may sound a little surprising, but individuals who recover from panic attacks report positive changes. They develop a greater self-awareness, stronger coping skills, improved emotional intelligence. We could all use a little bit of that. Increased empathy, better stress management. Who can't have a little stress management improvement, right? In some ways, overcoming panic becomes an opportunity to grow, to be better, to be all you can be. If there's one thing I'd like you to remember today, it is that panic attacks are powerful, but they are not powerful because they are dangerous. They're powerful because they convince us we are in danger. That distinction matters. A panic attack in your body's alarm system pulling the fire alarm when there is no fire. The sensations are real, the fear is real, but the catastrophe your mind predicts rarely occurs. With education, treatment, support, a good ear, practice, 54321, people recover from panic attacks every day. They travel, they work, they get on highways, they go to concerts, they attend venues with other people, they have active lives, if you will. They live meaningful lives, they pursue careers. If you or a friend you have happens to be one of the millions of people that struggle with panic attacks, know this: you're not weak, you're not broken, you're not alone. Remember, stay safe and stay smart. This is On the Couch with Dr. Ty.